Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Wadrago with the University of Illinois Extension's Community and Economic Development Program. We're happy to host another weekly BEAD deep dive with the Illinois Office of Broadband and the Illinois Broadband Lab. Always happy to welcome back Devin Braunstein, who is going to kick off today's session and introduce any other sort of content or additional education. And so, welcome, Devin. Thank you so much for being here and always providing this outreach and everything you do for the communities across the state. You can take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy, and happy Wednesday, everyone. Excited to be back with our weekly BEAD webinar series where we will be digging into various topics related to the Connect Illinois Round 4 Sub-Grantee selection process. So today we're going to be sharing more details about that actual Sub-Grantee selection process. So we talked about scoring, we talked about various rules, how to comply, and now I will be walking through some of the more in-depth steps that you might not have seen before. So, Matt, are you able to share the slides? All right. All right, I think we're good to go now. Thank you. So we can skip ahead to slide 3, since I shared a little bit about the context here. So 2 main discussion topics today. I'll give a really quick recap of BEAD and where we are in the process, no major updates there. And then I will dive into the sub-grantee selection process overview. So to recap, as always, BEAD, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, is a $42.45 billion federal program that aims to connect all eligible households and businesses and community anchor institutions across the country to affordable quality broadband service. And here in Illinois, on the next slide, we have been allocated $1.04 billion to achieve this goal, prioritizing connecting unserved and underserved locations and then community anchor institutions, maximizing fiber where possible, but also awarding applications for non-fiber as well, and focusing on affordability through a low-cost broadband service option. Here's a snapshot of our timeline. Didn't have any major updates today outside of that. We are told that we're in one of the final stages of our curing process with the BEAD challenge data. So hoping to get that final BEAD eligibility map out to you all as soon as we can. And then we'll be rolling right along toward the sub-grantee selection process. All right, well, with that, let's go ahead and dive in. So the goal of today's presentation is to preview, but also go into a little bit more depth on the sub-grantee selection process. So all of this, for the most part, is in our initial proposal, volume 2, but there are some new pieces here that the state has kind of filled in the gaps for, further refined as we are actually mapping out our end-to-end process and the tools and processes that we will use to evaluate, accept applications, and then make those awards. So bear with me. Some of these are a little bit detailed. I'm happy to stop and answer questions, but let's dive in. So at the highest level, the sub-grantee selection process will be structured as 3 application waves. I will walk through each wave and the requirements to be scored in each wave. So starting with wave 1, we will accept applications for any reliable broadband technology or alternative technology, but the restriction in wave 1 and sort of the opportunity to participate is based on the applications that we will score and preliminarily award. So we will score and preliminarily award applications that meet 2 criteria. One, projects that are end-to-end fiber, and two, projects that include a specific threshold of hard-to-serve project area units. We'll talk a little bit more about the deconfliction process in this presentation, but overall, kind of keep in mind throughout each wave, the highest scoring application will prevail if that application overlaps with another application. After each wave, we will publish those preliminarily awarded PAUs, so they'll kind of be grayed out, not able to be selected for future waves, and we'll go through that process for each wave. So wave one, we have those kind of two criteria that applicants will need to meet to be preliminarily awarded. Then we'll go to wave two and expand that to all reliable broadband technologies. So any reliable broadband technology applications will be reviewed and scored in wave two. Another important milestone that happens in wave two is the state will determine the extremely high cost per location thresholds, and this is the threshold above which the state may choose to select non-fiber projects over a fiber project. Those preliminarily awarded fiber projects will have the opportunity to revise their proposal to fall underneath that threshold, and if they do not take that opportunity, that project area will kind of be back in play for others to apply for. Again, during wave two, more deconfliction will occur to make sure that we're not awarding overlapping locations, and we will again publish those preliminarily awarded project area units. Wave three is optional and will essentially happen if there are remaining project area units or PAUs that have not been preliminarily awarded in waves one or two. So wave three is essentially the last opportunity to submit a proposal. This is where we may work one-on-one with providers who have been awarded to make sure that every single eligible area is claimed. This could involve advocating for more match waivers. This could involve splitting up PAUs to make sure that those locations individually are accounted for as it makes sense with those individual projects. And this is also where we'll consider opening up the process to alternative technologies like low Earth orbit satellite and unlicensed fixed wireless, kind of pending previous interest as well as remaining available resources. The goal is also to include CAIs, community anchor institutions, along with all unserved and underserved locations to get 100% coverage, but based on NTIA's guidance around prioritization, if we are over budget, the community anchor institutions in the projects would be the first to be de-scoped to make sure that we fall within our $1 billion total budget. After we run the three waves, we'll take a final look at that portfolio of selected projects, collect any additional information that we need to make sure that they have the financial, operational, technical, and managerial capabilities to carry out those BEAD projects for which they were awarded. So just a couple of other commentary on here. Oops, sorry, y'all, one sec. All right, thanks for bearing with me. That means I haven't stood up in a while. So a couple of additional notes before I move on. Wave one reflects our goal of pursuing all locations, including those locations that might be hardest to serve or least desirable from a business or financial perspective. So we're really looking for applicants who are willing to take on a certain threshold of hard to serve locations. And that's kind of why this group gets first dibs at all locations. So we don't run the risk of getting to the end of the road and those hardest to serve locations are kind of left behind with no options. And then finally, just to reiterate, wave three is where we will go into direct negotiations. The previous waves will be pretty cut and dry in terms of scoring, deconfliction, and then publishing those updated project area units. One more note on wave three. Because this wave is optional, we encourage everyone to apply in wave one or wave two. Wave three is really just to pick up those final project area units. But if you want to make sure that you're not missing out on BEAD and you're getting, as close to first dibs for your priority locations as much as you can, please apply in wave 1 or wave 2. All right. So this next slide shows an overview of the application steps, and this grouping of steps will occur within each wave. So here's what it looks like at a high level. First, the applicant will use our BEAD project selection tool, or BEAD map is what we've been calling it, to select and then download their project area units of choice for that specific application. Then they'll submit an application, which includes an entity form, their project form, and then their final submission. Our state evaluation committee, which consists of a group of merit reviewers, will review qualifications and submit final scores. Then, based on those scores, we'll make preliminary awards to applicants and offer the opportunity for lower scoring, conflicting applications to be resubmitted and de-scoped, so removing areas that may have been claimed by a higher scoring application. Then we'll finalize the preliminary awards for that wave and roll over any remaining applications to the next wave. A couple of disclaimers. Those preliminary awards are, as they're called, preliminary. So we, as the state, reserve the right to validate all of those requirements are met, that entities have provided all of the required qualification materials, and all of that is going to be required of us before we get the confirmation from NTIA that we can move forward with that project. And again, everything is preliminary until we get that final NTIA approval. So any back and forth we have, any questions, it's really all for this goal of making sure that you as an applicant have the skills, capabilities that you need to carry out this project. So then we can go ahead and make that case to NTIA and advocate for this project to be funded. On the next slide, you'll see a preview of our BEAD mapping tool, also known as the PAU selector tool. So in our October 2nd webinar, we did more of a deeper dive into this tool with lots of screenshots, but wanted to flash it up here again. So this will be a website that shows all BEAD eligible locations, and you'll have the ability to toggle on and off different layers, and then ultimately select those project area units that you would like to include in your project. So this tool will automatically calculate how many hard to serve PAUs do you have in your project, how many unserved and underserved locations, and then the reference cost, which we will use to make those final awards. Now, on the next slide, this provides a breakdown of across the 3 waves, the eligibility, the target project type, and the scored technology for each wave. So a bit of a review of what I just shared, but hopefully breaks it down in a helpful way. So looking at this first line, eligibility, all providers that fall into either reliable broadband technology or an alternative technology can apply for any of the 3 waves. We will accept those applications. We will only score and preliminarily award applications in each wave based on some of the guidelines set out here. So in wave 1, we'll award those preliminarily award those priority broadband projects that meet a certain threshold of hard to serve PAUs. In wave 2, we'll consider those beyond just priority broadband technology, meaning end-to-end fiber in addition to other reliable broadband technologies. And then in wave 3, we'll include all 3 tiers of technology, end-to-end fiber, non-fiber, reliable broadband technology, as well as alternative technology projects. I will reinforce that NTIA has not released final guidance on how states should consider applications for alternative technology projects, as well as how we should evaluate these technologies to confirm that they can indeed meet the BEAD requirements. So that is top of mind for us, and we'll have more formal guidance and processes laid out as we get closer to that third wave. All right. So overall, our goal is to get as broad of participation as possible. And so with that, we've worked to make the application as easy and straightforward for applicants as we can. So what this looks like is only asking for the level of information we really need at each stage in the process. Of course, balancing, us feeling confident that what applicants submit can achieve these goals so we can deliver for Illinois residents down the road. We'll also be reusing requirements from pre-qualification as applicants direct us to. So those 41 entities who did participate in pre-qualification will have a bit of a step ahead when they're preparing their applications for waves 1, 2, and 3. So with that, there are 3 buckets of the application process. The first is the entity submission form. So one entity, one applicant only needs to complete their entity form once. This is where most of those pre-qualification materials fall. So hopefully less work for folks who did participate in the pre-qualification process. Once you submit this entity form, you'll have an ID, and this entity ID will be carried out throughout the rest of your project application. So one entity to one entity submission form, then that entity may opt to submit many projects. So your project form will include project-specific information, like your budget, those specific project area units, your network designs, as well as some of the examples listed here in the second column. Finally, once you've submitted your entity form and your project form, you'll finalize this in the state portal, and this is sort of our formal go-ahead to review your application. All right. I see we have some questions, but I will save those for the end or when we have a breaking point. So the purpose of this slide is to show what happens in the process before your application is scored. So essentially, we'll want to make sure that all projects are qualified to participate in BEAD before they move into the formal scoring process. So this is broken down into that entity form and that submission form. This is kind of what we see on the back end. So you'll go ahead and prepare and submit your information. And this is a glimpse into what the state team, what the evaluation team will consider as we are going through the process of reviewing everything that's come in. So first, we'll review what comes in. Oop, you can go back, thanks. First, we'll review what goes in through your entity submission form. We'll have a checklist to make sure that everything looks good and everything that should be there is there. If your qualifications are met, then that's great. You have the green light to move on to the next phase in the process. If there is something major missing and we can't move forward, we'll share curing comments with you, and your application can be resubmitted in the next wave. We'll try our best to work with you if it's a small, piece of the application missing, but really we are pretty stringent on making sure that applications are complete to move them through the process. And this is just based on, our standard grant application and acceptance process here at DCEO. So if your entity qualifications are met, that's great. And we'll move you on to the project form to review your project submission materials. Similarly, if there is something missing or something that is a flag that says you're not qualified, we'll share those comments back with you to prepare for the next wave. Ideally, everything looks great and you are qualified to participate. And in that case, we will do that final scoring and rank the applications in order of score to determine which applications are awarded, preliminarily awarded. This slide shows the overall sort of landscape of qualifications that the BEAD program requires applicants and prospective grantees to meet. So you can see that the boxes in navy are those qualifications that were already included in the pre-qual phase. So again, if you participated, hopefully you got the green light on most, if not all of those qualifications, and you'll have an opportunity in the application to tell us, I don't need to submit this again because, I want to use what you already signed off on this summer, which we encourage folks to do. As need be, there will also be an opportunity to resubmit documentation if something has updated since the pre-qual phase. Everything else in blue are those incremental requirements that the BEAD program has us collect to confirm that both the entity and the project are qualified to deliver what the BEAD program commits to doing. So we'll get into more information on these once our guidance materials come out, but these are kind of the main buckets of information that we will collect. Next slide. As a reminder, this is the rubric that we will use for scoring. So this can be found in our initial proposal, volume 2. We also did a deep dive on this back in, I think, late September. So we'll be sure to include a link to that webinar in the recap materials. But to offer a high-level overview here, like I mentioned, there are a series of just baseline qualifications that applicants have to meet. Only then will they be scored. Some of those qualifying materials will contribute to their scoring, such as network designs will want to confirm that the speed to deployment that you're committing to in your application lines up with how you're planning to get there. But other qualifications will just serve as that gating criteria to help us know, whether or not your project should be moved on to this final phase. So the scoring criteria is relatively cut and dry. So there will be opportunities for applicants to kind of play around with this in advance to, do some math around if I put forth this match and I request this much BEAD outlay, where does that leave me in terms of score? Or if I incorporate, this level of local coordination, how might I be able to increase the amount of points I'm awarded? So the criteria here are broken down into primary and secondary. Primary are the required scoring criteria per NTIA guidelines. Secondary are those that were kind of encouraged or other criteria that the state could add. So going back to primary, we'll be looking at the degree of non-state match. How much skin in the game is this applicant putting forth in terms of financial match? We'll look at BEAD program outlay. This means how much BEAD funding is the applicant requesting to do this project. And this is something that we'll compare to the reference cost to get a sense for, is this reasonable? Is this what we expect? Or is this, a lot less or a lot more, which we might look into. Affordability. So we've published a reference cost for fiber projects that will be for the 100 symmetrical, and for non-fiber projects that will be for 100 over 20 speeds. And we will look at how far off from that reference price are you proposing to charge for those speeds. If it is higher, you'll earn less points. And if it is lower, you will earn more points. So again, that's something that you could kind of play around with in advance to understand how competitive your application may be. Fair labor practices will be looking at both your history of compliance as well as future plans to comply and any sort of processes, internal trainings you have in place to help make sure that you and your contractors are compliant with fair labor practices. We'll look at speed to deployment. So you'll have a chance to earn points if the deployment commitment is less than 2 years. We'll look at the speed of network and technical capabilities. We'll look at open access. So are you planning to offer any sort of open access to other providers or other entities that may want to use your infrastructure. Again, this is not required, just an opportunity to earn more points should you want to take advantage of this option. And then finally, local coordination. So this is a mix of evidence of community support, which might be a letter of support, it might be alignment to community plans, evidence that you have met with community members, local governments, local leaders, local businesses, and are in line with their priorities, as well as a chance to demonstrate financial commitment from that community. So for example, a community might contribute to your match or might contribute other sorts of in-kind resources like waived permit fees, for example. And on the next slide, this is a recap of the order prioritization of technologies considered through the BEAD program. So this is following federal guidance, NTIA guidance, and is incorporated across our 3 waves. So first is reliable broadband service, priority broadband projects, which are end-to-end fiber. Second is all other reliable broadband service. So non-priority qualifying broadband, such as fixed wireless, cable, hybrid, etc. And then finally, alternative technologies such as unlicensed fixed wireless and low Earth orbit satellite. And as I shared before, NTIA has not yet released final guidance for states on how we should evaluate these alternative technologies or incorporate them directly. So this is on our radars, and we will be looking out for formal NTIA guidance on this to incorporate likely in our Wave 3, again, based on what we have coverage for, funding left, and what that overall portfolio looks like as we progress towards making sure that every single eligible location is claimed by an applicant. So this slide talks through the term I mentioned before called the extremely high cost per location threshold. This concept is inherently a little bit wonky, so I'll walk through how it is actually applied in practice. So first, qualifying applications are scored. And again, qualifying means they pass that first threshold of this entity and this project are qualified to do the work that they are proposing to do. First, we'll look at, are there priority broadband projects, meaning are there fiber projects in this wave? If there are, and that project is less than the extremely high cost per location threshold, so all of this is happening in Wave 2, then that project will be preliminarily awarded. If that fiber broadband project is above the extremely high cost per location threshold, then we look at, is there a reliable broadband service project that may not be fiber? So first, we'll give that fiber project the opportunity to revise their project. But second, we will look for another reliable broadband service project. And if that project is high scoring and is lower than the threshold, that project would get the award. Moving on to that final line, if there is not a reliable broadband technology project that is not fiber or another reliable broadband technology per NTIA's definition, or there might be, but it also goes above that cost threshold, that is where states have the option to select an alternative technology project, which again, guidance is forthcoming on, because Illinois will not award any projects that we can't confirm will meet those BEAD performance and speed requirements. And maybe one more note to add here is how the extremely high cost per location threshold is determined. So to simplify it, we're looking at the number of applications received, the type of applications received, and the asks from a financial standpoint. And we're looking at that against the total budget. So some locations that exceed the thresholds and that are fiber, the state may opt to fund it, and BEAD does allow that. However, we expect that there will be many projects that do exceed the threshold that, based on the limited costs available, we will look to other technologies outside of just fiber to strike that balance of covering every location with the dollars that we do have. All right. So now we'll go into a little bit more depth on deconfliction. And deconfliction is this funky word that I don't know existed before the BEAD process. I sure didn't use it. But in this context, it means the process of de-scoping a project that overlaps with a higher scoring project. So at a high level, if there are applications that come in that overlap, the score will be the first determinant of who gets priority in terms of preliminary award. Then that second project that might have scored high but didn't quite get that highest score, we'll look at a couple of things to deconflict it. So first, we want to see whether the claimed area, so the sort of already awarded area, represents more or less than 10% of the total project area. If it comprises less than 10% of the area, it'll be automatically de-scoped using the reference cost. So the applicant won't have to do anything. We'll sort of automatically preliminarily award the rest of that project area to that applicant. On the flip side, if the claimed area represents more than 10% of that application, then we'll go back to the applicant and they will have the chance to adjust their project, sort of offering their best and final bid application for this unclaimed area, resubmit, and this will then be rescored along with everything else that comes in during that wave during deconfliction. If a project does not score high enough, it'll then be rolled over into the next wave. But what's important to note here is that this is all happening within one wave. So it's not a sort of all or nothing opportunity if there's overlap between your submission and another one. Our goal is to make this work for strong projects, and we want to select these preliminary winners, ideally in wave 1 and wave 2, leaving just the final outliers for wave 3. So those are just some important notes here, and let me see if there's anything else I missed on this slide. You could go back one for a moment. So options 1 and 2 talk about let's see, the 10% threshold. So whether a project will be automatically de-scoped or we will go back to that application and no deconfliction will happen with an application that does not score high enough. And now you can go to the next slide. So deconfliction, this is something that the state is handling internally. You don't need to understand it too much if you're not interested, but we like to bring everyone along for the ride so you have a sense for what's going on in the background after you've submitted applications while you're awaiting the results. So the purpose of this slide is to just show you what deconfliction looks like. So for example, I'll kind of walk you through the visuals here. On the left-hand side, you can see that there were a series of applications, 5 applications that came in, and application 1 scored a 93. So they were the highest score of the set of PAUs, and they were preliminarily selected. Then the next highest scoring application also was preliminarily selected. Because its overlap with the first highest scoring application was less than 10% of its total application, it was automatically deconflicted and rescored. So no need for the applicant to do anything. We pared it down and made that preliminary award. Then moving on to those final three applications, numbers 3, 4, and 5. If these applications overlap with the awarded applications by 10% or more, then they have 10 business days to relook at what they submitted, de-scope to get rid of those areas that were already claimed, and then resubmit. Finally, we then look at those resubmitted applications and we rescore them all within the wave, and then follow the same process, looking at the highest score to make those preliminary awards. Any applications that have not been awarded will be rolled over to the next wave unless that applicant decides to withdraw or revise its application before the next wave. You can go to the next slide. So, like I mentioned, applications that have not been selected, they didn't score high enough, will automatically roll over to the next wave to be considered in that pool unless the applicant tells us differently. So next I'll walk through these 4 potential outcomes. First, if within a wave an application is preliminarily selected, no action required unless we need further information about some qualification during that final review period. Scenario 2, an application is not selected and it does not conflict with a preliminary winner. In this case, the application will be automatically rolled over to the next wave. The applicant always has the option to revise, resubmit, and point us to an updated application. The third scenario is that an application is not selected and it conflicts with a preliminary winner. In this case, the application will not be automatically rolled over, and that applicant should take a look at the preliminarily awarded PAUs to see how they should revise their application and resubmit in the next wave should that still be an area of the state that they're interested in serving. And finally, there may be an application that didn't pass that first qualification phase. So they, weren't able to come up with the match. They don't have a letter of credit or a letter of credit waiver compliant option. Maybe they haven't demonstrated that they have the right expertise or experience. For any of these reasons, we would give them that curing feedback and their application wouldn't be considered, but they would have a chance to work on it. We could meet with them and submit in the next wave. So overall, Illinois' approach is to encourage broad applications from as many qualified participants as possible, because this is the only way that we can achieve our goal of reaching universal service. But it's important to know that every sub-grantee will be vetted throughout the process to confirm that they can carry out the work that they commit to. I think many of us here know about other programs that may have overcommitted without doing that vetting. So it is our goal to deliver for Illinois households who have been waiting so long for broadband. So we are working really hard to strike that right balance of working with providers to ask for the right level of information from you to then give us confidence that you can deliver on these projects for the appropriate amount of funding to deliver service to Illinois residents. So thank you for bearing with us throughout this process. And of course, we are always open to feedback, but really prioritizing what is truly necessary at the beginning. And then we'll make sure to follow up before formal awards are made, so we have everything that we're required to submit to NTIA for that final proposal, because their green light is required for us to execute sub-grantee agreements and proceed. So we'll be both confirming applicant and project capabilities, as you see on the left side here, and confirming that our selections are consistent with BEAD criteria. So kind of the marriage of these two things is what will happen throughout this process. So I will wrap up. I know that was a lot. So a couple of resources here. We, of course, have our BEAD landing page. You can flip back. We have our BEAD landing page here. We have our sub-grantee selection process page. And then we have our FAQs, which are published after each session. So typically within a week, I'll update the FAQ document with any Q&As that happen during the webinar or anything pertinent over email exchange. Our initial proposal, volume 2, is still the best source of truth and detail, and we will publish our final NOFO once we get that green light on our final BEAD locations. And so with that, I will pause and look to take some questions. All right. So I see a question of preliminary or provisional. And this is a terminology that NTIA has recently clarified. So every award is preliminary throughout our waves, and no providers, no preliminary winners will be published throughout the 3 waves. Then we have to have a meeting with NTIA where we present all of the preliminary awardees. Only after that time are the awardees considered provisional, and those provisional awardees are brought to NTIA for final approval. So they're not very different, but with the preciseness of the BEAD process, we're working to make sure that, we're using the right term for the right stage in the process. All right, looking at the next question. Is the need for only putting in might need to paraphrase this one. So it is the need, I guess, are the projects only going to be funding broadband, fiber, and non-fiber projects, or is there any need for project management training or other projects? So BEAD funding can fund all of the eligible costs required to carry out a BEAD project, which includes both the materials and the staff contractors needed to build, as well as personnel, project managers, engineers, consultants, workforce required to make the project happen. So both categories of expenses are eligible for BEAD. And I believe workforce, such as, complying with apprenticeship requirements or training folks, is an eligible cost. Any other questions? Feel free to put any other questions, thoughts, feedback in the chat. Or you can email me at broadband@illinois.gov if you think of something after our call today. We'll wait another minute or so. But hopefully this was a helpful overview of how things will look once the applications open. And you can start preparing your materials now by looking at the volume 2. And we are working hard to get that final map published. I promise it looks pretty great. We were just testing it out, so it should be as user-friendly as possible. Okay, I am not seeing additional questions, so thank you again for your time today and for tuning in every week. We'll be back next week with more content and have updates hopefully soon on some dates for launch. So thank you again, and thanks Nancy and team for hosting.
Thank you, Devin. That's very exciting. We look forward to seeing you all next week.
All right, bye.